Blessed Lenten season, everybody, and Tony here with my review of John Adams Nixon in China, which I saw last night at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. The conductor was Daniel Carter. The creative conceptualization was done by Hauen und Stechen. The production was done by Franziska Kronfurt and Julia Lvovsky. The sets were done by Yasu Yabara. The costumes were done by Christina Schmidt. The videographer was Martin Malon. The lights were handled by Henning Streck. The sounds were done by Arne Firk. The chorus master was Jeremy Bynes. The dramaturg was Caroline Müller-Dohle. And the assistant director was Matteo Marziano Graziano. I was acquainted with this opera when I was about 12 years old back in 2004 or 2005. I remember reading an opera book that I loved and cherished so much, all about John Adams Nixon in China, and I was intrigued with the historical background and importance, as well as the various musical modes being implemented from jazz to classical to late romantic music, all the way up to a lot of the show tune beats that you would usually associate with Broadway musicals. On top of that, this was an opera that was also based on real life figures, much like in the vein of Giuseppe Verdi's Simon Boccanegra, as well as some of the authority figures found in Richard Wagner's operas, such as König Heinrich der Vogel or King Henry the Fowler from Lohengrin, and Hans Sachs from the Meistersinger von Nuremberg. As you can tell, Nixon in China was based on the real-life event occurring between President Richard Nixon of the United States and Chairman Mao Tse-Tung of China, encountering each other in China, of course, and shaking hands. This historic moment also signified the growing ties between the United States of America and China, considering that Nixon also wanted to use this as an effort to stop the Vietnam War, as well as many other contributions to American history, such as the war against drugs, as well as lowering the voting age from 21 years old to 18 years old, among a lot of the other contributions that he has made. This marked a moment in which US and Chinese relationships grew, and also showed that growing bond between both countries, considering that Richard Nixon was renowned for being totally anti-communist, while Mao Tse-tung, on the other hand, embraced communist concepts and beliefs, although some people might look at both Nixon and Mao Tse-tung as not the most wonderful men in history, and would also be sharp critics against Nixon and Mao Tse-tung, considering that Nixon did have some very questionable deeds, especially when it came to ransacking or attacking Cambodia to stop the Vietnam War. And Mao Tse-tung's legacy, well, it's been not a totally rosy one, as it's so full of criticisms and people who are just totally against his ideology, unless they forget about his wife, Jiang Jing, or Madame Mao, with whom people managed to have a lot of very contentious and vociferous opinions against her. And on top of that, there are also other historical figures such as Zhou Enlai, as well as Richard Nixon's right-hand man, Henry Kissinger, and his wife, Pat Nixon. So this opera does seem to have some very vital themes going on for it, especially when it comes to US and Chinese history intertwining, as well as the culture clash occurring between the Americans and the Chinese, especially highlighted in this opera. And even when Madame Mao or Jiang Jing affirms her communist and Chinese beliefs with her show-stopping aria, I am the wife of Mao Tse-tung, in which she fully embraces communism as well as subscribes to what the Red Book has been written all about. And the basic plot of this opera goes like this. Richard Nixon Pat Nixon and Henry Kissinger have arrived in China. Zhou Enlai also introduces them to Mao Tse-Tung, and hence the historic moment between Richard Nixon and Mao Tse-Tung shaking hands with each other is fully realized. This also ends up with both Americans and Chinese having a party and even celebrating each other with a whole lot of drinking and revelry. Pat Nixon, Richard Nixon's wife, is totally astounded with this new culture, this Oriental culture that she never expected to be so fully rich and ingrained in so much history, and is utterly fascinated and totally bewildered in the most exciting way possible. That is until Richard Nixon, Pat Nixon, and Henry Kissinger catch a ballet, which is the Red Detachment of Women. However, tensions rise when Pat Nixon sees a slave girl about to be executed. She tries to save her. However, Nancy Tang and two other secretaries tell the girl to give up the gun before Madame Mao or Chang Ching asserts her dominance and asserts her own disappointment of people just not understanding the importance of this piece by saying that she is the wife of Mao Tse-tung, and also declares her status with so much bravado and so much fierceness to the point where she thoroughly subscribes to everything that the Red Book has been written for her and her fellow Chinese people. The opera ends with both couples, i.e. Richard Nixon and Pat Nixon, and Mao Tse-tung and Chang Ching, reminiscing about their younger days, especially since Richard Nixon, Pat Nixon, and Henry Kissinger are about to depart from China. Zhou Enlai closes the opera by asking the audience and himself if what they have done is really good for all humankind. So this opera manages to combine elements found in Richard Wagner and Giuseppe Verdi, whether it is those huge grandiose pieces or even inserting a lot of the important historical figures into the opera, as well as some Broadway show tunes and jazz show tunes to also show that there is this Americanness in this opera, and considering that Richard Nixon is also a huge fan of jazz music. There's also the question of Orientalism found in this opera, especially when it comes to the Chinese characters. You have a lot of the Chinese characters being the other to the American characters' main character presence, in which they also have the sort of feeling that they are quite strange to these American tourists or American politicians, and how their culture clash is about to commence, and how everything resolves quite nostalgically and smoothly, yet quite somberly when it comes to Richard Nixon's, Pat Nixon's, Mao Tse-tung's, and Chang Ching's moments together as they reminisce about their younger days. And this opera, therefore, was quite a trip from beginning to end. Whether it's a traditional production I would have loved to see, or even in this production done by Howard und Stechen, there's no doubt that John Adams, Nixon in China definitely had a lot to offer. Going into the production, what I've noticed about this particular production of John Adams Nixon in China is basically a hodgepodge of Sergio Leone, Quentin Tarantino, David Cronenberg, Steven Spielberg, Ridley Scott, John Carpenter, and George Lucas rolled up into one package. I bring up these particular filmmakers because this is basically a hodgepodge of science fiction and fantasy, as well as surrealist film with some body horror as well as some really risque scenes and some of the referential humor and homages. The opening credits, after all, kind of do remind me of a Quentin Tarantino film or a gangster film, but mostly Quentin Tarantino in the vein of Pulp Fiction, as well as Reservoir Dogs, and even a bit of Kill Bill Volumes 1 and 2. As for Richard Nixon, Pat Nixon, and Henry Kissinger arriving in China as if though they were astronauts, this almost reminds me of Georges Méliès's The Voyage to the Moon, as well as Planet of the Apes, in which the American characters are perceived as a lot more evolutionized as well as advanced than the more conservative, traditional Chinese people. And we also get to see that in full force with some of the bodily stereotypes being used, like Richard Nixon being all hairy from head to toe, but his face is clean shaven, although the rest of his body is all covered in hair, while Mao Tse-Tung is fully clean shaven and a little bit more clean cut than the more rugged Richard Nixon, as if to highlight the stereotype that American people are known for being rugged and don't really seem to care if they have that much hair on their bodies, whereas with the Chinese people, they're known for being rather clean and extremely clean from top to bottom, as well as totally pure, trying to make sure that they don't have any imperfections in their body. What's also interesting is the usage of Frank Herbert's Dune series, especially when the Mao Tse-Tung of this production dresses up as if though he were a sandworm human hybrid, i.e. Leo Atreides II. And that particular reference was quite interesting because I'm pretty sure that for those of you who have been familiar with the Dune series, you'll probably realize that one of the characters, i.e. Leo Atreides II, has all of these supernatural powers as well as all of this intellect that he has managed to imbue, let alone ingrain, when he ends up as this sandworm human hybrid. I should know because not only did I research about this from a lot of the books, but also caught a Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy episode in which Mandy imagines a future in which she is a human worm hybrid. And that's pretty much what Mao Tse-Tung initially appears in this production, and it's also helped with Nancy Tang and the two other secretaries being dressed in green as if though they were Poison Ivy's minions, well, more specifically, Poison Ivy from the Batman series, whether it's in the comics or the animated series from the 1990s. So there's also a lot of popular culture references in this particular production. On top of that, we get to see a sort of transformation of Mao's wife, Chang Jing, from someone who appears quite unassuming, yet still has a fair bit of power about her, especially when she is in a sky blue dress and just seems to dance along to the toast scene. And she also ends up being transformed into a sort of Queen of the Night figure when she is in the second half of the opera and when she launches at her coloratura soprano showpiece aria, I Am the Wife of Mao Tse-Tung. And if that were not enough, there's also a reference to another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd in which the women are also turned into Chinese sausages, which I thought was just not only crazy, but also shows that no matter who you are in life, especially according to this production, you'll always end up as if though you were someone else's meat, or basically used as if though you were nothing more than a foodstuff for the higher-ups. There are also some cheeky behind-the-scenes moments, especially with the use of the camera and some commentary going along, whether it's the actors and actresses talking about what's going on next, or the pre-show filming of Mao Tse-Tung first wearing a mask and then taking it off to have his followers go after him, who also in turn are wearing the similar getup he does, as if though that they are his most loyal followers and most loyal devotees, and a video of Richard Nixon and Pat Nixon to show that there's an adventurous side to the both of them. The biggest issue I did have with this production, however, was the plotting and the padding before the opera ended. It felt like we were waiting for the entire opera to finish when the atomic bomb or the nuclear bomb goes off, and then we see at the screen how many years have passed since the main action, and it doesn't stop until it reaches about 1 million something, which I thought just added way too much padding and way too much plotting when we should have just gotten to it. And what we've seen at the epilogue is basically everybody in a post-apocalyptic world. We only have Henry Kissinger, Richard Nixon, Zhou Enlai, Pat Nixon, and Zhang Qing as the remaining inhabitants of a dystopian world akin to Mad Max. But this time, there's shrimp people, which almost feels like it's in the vein of Ridley Scott and George Lucas. So this is where the opera kind of ends with nearly everybody dying or dead, but Zhou Enlai is still alive, but he is kind of on the verge of passing away. So this production of John Adams Nixon in China was a major hodgepodge of interesting moments and a whole lot of homages from film, television, comics, and popular culture in general. The popular cultural aspects of this opera kind of also reminds us, the viewers, that there is quite the emphasis of American popular culture, as well as the films being used to also make this production come to life. This also provokes the question of Orientalism, especially when we get to see the Chinese people portrayed in a more othered-like, as opposed to the Americans, who are a lot more macho-driven, money-driven, and also seem to have a lot more in common with the materialistic values. It's basically poking fun, let alone criticizing, and even poking some stereotypes at both sides, with the Americans coming off as large and in charge and totally all about the show, and the Chinese being just as showy as the Americans are, but in their own subtle, refined ways, as opposed to the Americans, who are just a lot more outgoing and exuberant and way more extroverted. So there is that sort of poking fun of stereotypes from both sides of the pond, as well as the popular culture references, as well as the music references that made this opera production rather interesting. But if I want something a little bit more down to earth that still manages to drive the message home about Richard Nixon's and Mao Tse-Tung's encounter in China, as well as the overall message that this opera tries to convey, in which there are two powers that get acquainted with each other and therefore form a bond that might surprise each other in a unique way, I would probably stick to a more traditional production. This production, done by Hauen und Stechen, really does emphasize the overall stereotypes as well as the overall messages and the caricatures that define these real-life people, but in a very entertaining way. It also did help that it had a lot of film references that could make any film fan totally interested, as well as have their eyes light up once they see all the references just come to life on the stage, as well as embodied by the various characters of this opera. And now we get to the singers, starting off with Thomas Lehmann as Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon does need a dramatic baritone who basically does specialize in a great deal of Italianate, French, and German operas, just to name a few. He may have the strong and charismatic and fierce presence of a Rigoletto and a Iago, or even a Gianni Schicchi, but he also has that noble lyricism found in Marcello from La Bohème, and lest they forget about Gunther from Götterdämmerung, as well as that additional nobility found in Wolfram von Eschenbach from Tannhäuser. This is a baritone role that does require a great deal of beefy singing, but he also has to have some lyricism to find some balance in this role, as well as his overall baritone voice. And Thomas Lehmann was truly magnificent as Richard Nixon. His clarion baritone voice was truly brilliant all the way through. He was charismatic, he was totally engaging as a singing actor, and he just made me thoroughly engaged with everything that he had to accomplish as a wonderful singing actor. I mentioned in a previous review of his performance as Macbeth that he did remind me of an amalgamation of Lawrence Tibbett, especially when it came to his stage presence, and Leonard Warren, considering that nowadays Thomas Lehmann is heading towards the dramatic baritone repertoire, and a little bit of Cheryl Milnes, considering his origins as a more lyrical baritone. And with Thomas Lehmann, I have to give him a whole lot of applauses, salutes, and a whole lot of love for what he was able to accomplish last night as Richard Nixon. He was definitely in his element and A game, and overall excellent performance last night, and he therefore won me over as a thoroughly disciplined and thoroughly consistent singing actor. Then we get to Henry Kissinger, performed by Porrick Rowan. Henry Kissinger does need a bass baritone who could also perform some baritonal roles such as Telramund from Lohengrin, or even Alberich from the Ring tetralogy, well, more specifically Das Rheingold and Siegfried. And he also does need to have a little bit of roundness found in Dottor Bartolo from Il Barbiere di Siviglia, as well as a little bit of lightness found in Fra me di Donne from La Forza del Destino. And let's say forget about that additional earthiness found in The Monk from Verdi's Don Carlo. Therefore, the role of Henry Kissinger is basically a bass baritone role that has also attracted a fair amount of bass baritones or basso cantantes doing this role really well, and Porrick Rowan brought in a great deal of charisma, charm, and virility as Henry Kissinger. His voice definitely grew in a whole lot of coordination and core, and I was all here for it. He definitely grew as a singing actor, and his technical prowess was thoroughly astounding. There was not one moment where I thought he wobbled, and he was able to grow in such a great deal of focus, clarity, and a whole lot of engagement, thus making him win in my eyes as Henry Kissinger. Kyle Miller was also a handsome, dashing, and thrilling Cho En-lai. Cho En-lai is just as dramatic of a role as Richard Nixon, because he also does need a baritone who can balance some dramatic singing as well as combine it with a little bit of lyricism. I will argue that Cho En-lai is a little bit more lyrical than Richard Nixon, although Richard Nixon has a fair bit of lyricism in his voice, but Cho En-lai also does require require a little bit more of dramatic singing, and there have been no shortages of baritones who have specialized as Cho and Lai, and they would also go on to perform roles such as Silvio from I Pagliacci, and in Richard Nixon's case, some of them would also go on to sing Alfio from Cavalleria Rusticana. But going back to Chu and Lai, there are also some baritones who would also have a go at Il Conte di Luna from Il Trovatore, Ford from Falstaff, Rodrigo di Posa from Don Carlo, and even Chaunard from La Bohème, plus a great deal of cavalier baritone or grand seigneur baritone roles. And Kyle Miller's voice definitely has the potential to go the cavalier baritone or grand seigneur baritone route. There is a nobility in his voice that I have cherished so much. It has a lot of core, it has a lot of beautiful musicianship and great incision from bottom to top. There was no wobble. There was no thirtiness. It was thoroughly clear from bottom to top, and he just rocked it with all of his might, strength, and overall handsomeness. I could see a brilliant future in Kyle Miller performing roles such as Silvio from I Pagliacci, Il Conte di Luna from Il Trovatore, Rodrigo di Posa from Don Carlo, and he'd be a natural as Rodrigo di Posa from Don Carlo one day, Ford from Falstaff, and maybe even Marco from Gianni Schicchi, as well as basically a great deal of grand seigneur baritone roles in the vein of Mario Sereni, one of my most favorite cavalier baritones of all time, unless they forget about Lescaut from Puccini's Manon Lescaut. This gentleman definitely has a brilliant future in all of these roles, and his vocal prowess tells me that he can definitely own them with everything that he's got. Alfred Kim was a wonderfully imposing, powerful, and strong Mao Tse-Tung. And Mao Tse-Tung does need either a spinto tenor or dramatic tenor or Heldentenor with enough incision and heft to make this role come to life. He essentially needs to combine the steeliness and the power found in the young Siegfried from Wagner's Siegfried and that beautiful musicianship found in Walter von Stolzing from the Meistersinger von Nürnberg, as well as Parsifal from Wagner's Parsifal, a little bit of lyricism found in Walter von der Vogelweide from Wagner's Tannhäuser, and Arindal from Wagner's Die Feen, and lest they forget about the steelier Italianate qualities found in Don José from Carmen, although it's a French role, plus Calaf from Puccini's Turandot, Macduff from Verdi's Macbeth, and Ismaele from Verdi's Nabucco, unless they forget about those flowing lines that define Oronte from Verdi's I Lombardi alla prima crociata. Therefore, any tenor who is prepared to tackle Mao Tse-Tung must overcome those challenges of trying to sing as metallically as possible and also combine that metallic quality with some beautiful Italian lyricism, as well as a lot of blood and guts, unless they forget about the passion found in Turidu from Mascagni's Cavalleria Rusticana, as well as Luigi from Puccini's Il Tabarro. And Alfred Kim continues to win in my eyes as Mao Tse-Tung, even to the point where he acted the part really well as convincingly. His voice continued to radiate with clarity, clarion power, might, strength, and a whole lot of manly charisma that I was thoroughly amazed at everything that Alfred Kim had to offer. The wobble didn't really seem that much of an issue anymore, as his tone actually grew a little bit more focused, and he definitely caught up well in terms of clarity, strength, and an overall imposing presence that made Alfred Kim a thoroughly winsome singing actor. So bravo to Alfred Kim for such an amazing job as Mao Tse-Tung. Catherine Manley was a sparkling, sultry, gorgeous, and absolutely beautiful and exceptionally disciplined Pat Nixon. Pat Nixon needs either a light lyric soprano or lyric coloratura soprano to bring this role to complete life. What you really need in Pat Nixon is to combine the lyricism found in Pamina from Mozart's Die Zauberflöte, Susanna from Mozart's Le Nozze di Figaro, Zerlina from Mozart's Don Giovanni, and also combine those aspects with Musetta's fiery, spunky, sparkling personality from Puccini's La Bohème, as well as Nella's gorgeous lyricism from Puccini's Gianni Schicchi, as well as the coloratura fireworks found in Olympia from Le Conte of Man by Jacques Offenbach, Lucia Ashton from Lucia di Lammermoor, Violetta Valéry from La Traviata, Gilda from Rigoletto, as well as the equally beautiful lyricism found in The Heavenly Voice from Verdi's Don Carlo and The Priestess from Aida, just to name a few roles that have also kind of become a little bit more of inspirations for Pat Nixon. Pat Nixon's vocal qualities remain in beautiful lyricism, as well as proving that she can also sing with agility, clarity, and a silvery tone that could attract any light lyric or lyric coloratura soprano to this particular role. And Catherine Manley was an absolute godsend of a light lyric / lyric coloratura soprano who used her silvery, clear, bell-like, and naturally beautiful voice to bring this First Lady to life. She was thoroughly elegant, charismatic, and charming as Pat Nixon, to the point where I could never ever take my eyes and ears off of her. That was just how excellent Catherine Manley was as Pat Nixon. She was able to take advantage of that bel canto nobility, the Italianate flair, and that great Mozartian discipline to make Pat Nixon a role of her own. At times, her voice did kind of remind me of an amalgamation of Elisabeth Schwarzkopf and Wilma Lipp. Elisabeth Schwarzkopf, because she does have that silvery lyricism, as well as that fabulous use of legato, and of course that temperament that also exudes nobility with a hint of seductiveness, and Wilma Lipp because of that silvery quality that has also defined her as a lovely lyric coloratura soprano, and those qualities were absolutely in evidence with Catherine Manley as Pat Nixon. She definitely won me over in this role, and I can only salute her for all of the beautiful lyricism that she had to offer, as well as that silken, silvery, and sparkling tone that made her thoroughly win as an overall exceptional musician. Hye-Young Moon stole the show as Zhang Jing, aka Madame Mao. Zhang Jing, aka Madame Mao, has been attracting a great deal of lyric coloratura sopranos, including Tracy Dahl, Sumi Jo, Kathleen Kim, and Audrey Elizabeth Luna, just to name a few of the many coloratura sopranos who have kept Zhang Jing, aka Madame Mao, in their repertoire. Her signature aria, I Am the Wife of Mao Tse-Tung, has remained a staple in many lyric coloratura sopranos' concert pieces, as well as their overall operatic repertoire when it comes to opera arias. You people think that the Queen of the Night was tough? You people think that Serbinetta would be kind of challenging, let alone really challenging for many a coloratura soprano. You think that Lucia Ashton is just as crazy in terms of the demands that she needs to make this role win? You think that Violetta Valeri could be just as demanding as Chang-Ching, or even that of Gilda from Rigoletto, or even Olympia from Le Comte of Man, or Lacme, or Féline, or Ophélie, or many of the other great coloratura soprano roles from the bel canto, French, German, or any language repertoire, or even that of Amina from La Sonambula, Elvira from I Puritani, or even Linda de Chamonix, or Adina and Norina, or even Rosina in Il Barbiere di Siviglia. You think that those roles are challenging? Well, Chang-Ching can take those roles for a ride, because what she really needs in this particular role is a great deal of emotional involvement, as well as that silvery voice that could at least be present throughout an orchestra and even sing over that orchestra because of that magnificent showpiece that she has. This is not a typical Tweety Bird soprano role. This role does require a great deal of lyricism and a whole lot of agility to make this role win, but also that lyricism can be found in the likes of Pamina from Die Zauberflöte, Susanna from Le Nozze di Figaro, Zerlina from Don Giovanni, and Despina from Così fan tutte, as well as the sparkling lyric coloratura soprano from Madame Herz from Der Schauspieldirektor, as opposed to Pat Nixon, kind of reminding listeners of Madame Silberklang from that very same opera. Therefore, Chang-Ching, aka Madame Mao, does need a great deal of stage involvement as a singing actress to make this role work. And this is also based on the real-life Madame Mao, Chang-Ching, who in turn kind of acquired a great deal of controversy for her very questionable motives and for a lot of her actions being not so humane, to the point where the real-life Chang-Ching ended up being sentenced to life in prison with barely any chance of a parole, even though she was originally supposed to end up being put to death. But she ended up having life imprisonment for a very long time. And I could go on and on about the details about the real-life Chang-Ching, but as for now, the Chang-Ching in this opera really does need that coloratura showiness to make this character come to life, and Hye-Young Moon accomplished all that and more. She definitely won in this role with all the gold medals I could give to her, and all the blue ribbons I can give to her, and all the acclaim that I can give to her in terms of her technical prowess and her impeccable work as a lyric coloratura soprano. She definitely won the gold star, the platinum star, and the titanium star from yours truly because of her great technical work in this particularly demanding role. Her rendition of I Am the Wife of Mao Tse-Tung was thoroughly stirring, exciting, and managed to get my blood pumping every time she opened her mouth to sing those clarion, silvery, diamond-like, and dagger-like tones just pouring out of her mouth as if though they were sai being put to great use to stab an enemy, or a million arrows being shot from the bows to disintegrate any invader. That was just how much Hye-Young Moon won and triumphed and completely conquered the role of Chang-Ching with all of her amazing performing powers as well as her amazing performing prowess, thus making her totally triumph as Chang-Ching thanks to her vocal prowess as well as her overall flair for drama and her overall dedication as a singing actress. Elisa Fenda's chesty, gorgeous, and thoroughly awesome second secretary of Mao Tse-Tung Davia Boulet's equally chesty, gorgeous, and creamy third secretary of Mao Tse-Tung, and Karis Tucker's creamy, gorgeous, and lusciously toned Nancy Tang, the first secretary of Mao Tse-Tung, were an absolutely exceptional trio of mezzo-sopranos who made these roles work so well. The second secretary, third secretary, and Nancy Tang almost remind me of the three ladies from Mozart's Die Zauberflöte, specifically the third lady and her deep mezzo voice, the second lady and her middle-like mezzo voice, and the first lady, although she is a soprano, she's also been given to some mezzos, with Krista Ludwig and Katja Piewik being very notable interpreters of this role. And they also do remind me of the first, second, and third maids of Elektra, considering that the first maid is a contralto or a deep mezzo, and the second and third maids are given to mezzos, unless they forget about Grimgerde, Rosweisse, and Sigrun from Wagner's Die Walküre. What you really need in these roles are three mezzo-sopranos with a great deal of chestiness and some femininity found in some agility that they could also pull off. Think of a combination of Isabella from L'Italiana Nageri, Angelina from La Cenerentola, and Rosina with her mezzo-soprano roots being put to great use in these three secretaries, and there you have it, a wonderful ensemble of mezzos who can make these roles work so beautifully. And Elisa Fenda, Davia Boulet, and Karis Tucker managed to exceed my expectations with a lot of exceptional musicianship, great timing, and creamy tones that were full of chestiness and a whole lot of feminine beauty that made their interpretations work so awesomely and so brilliantly. I could never take my ears and eyes off of Elisa Fenda, Davia Boulet, and Karis Tucker because they were able to take great advantage of counterpoint and harmony to make their roles come to life, and they did so with focus, clarity, and a whole lot of engagement and involvement. I also have to give major props to Gina Lisa Maywald, Angela Braun, Torbjörn Björnsson, Jean Chazet, and Elsa Timar for their amazing performances as Jinghua, Jinghong, and the dancers. They were all brilliant performers from beginning to end, and they were also so charismatic in their respective roles. So overall, the singing was thoroughly excellent. Everything about the singing was totally flawless. Thomas Lehmann, Cal Miller, Porrick Rowan, Alfred Kim, Catherine Manley, Hye-Young Moon, Karis Tucker, Elisa Fenda, and Davia Boulet were thoroughly amazing singing actors, let alone singing thespians, who made their roles work so wonderfully. Whether it was Thomas Lehmann's round, rich, and even-toned, borderline dramatic baritone voice winning as Richard Nixon, or Hye-Young Moon singing up a storm full of brilliant thunderbolts and arrows just falling down from the sky as Zhang Jing, aka Madame Mao, or the absolutely gorgeous, sensuous trio of Karis Tucker, Davia Boulet, and Elisa Fenda winning as Mao Tse-Tung's three secretaries. Each and every one of the singers managed to pull in a lot of A-plus efforts and therefore win in my eyes and ears. I also have to give a lot of credit to the actors and dancers involved for also buttressing the performances with everything that they've got, and doing so in such an excellent manner. The conducting done by Daniel Carter was also excellent. He led that orchestra so amazingly, and he also knew how to find some nuances in certain moments, thus ensuring a great deal of balance. But when he had to go big and bombastic, you certainly bet that he did with everything that he's got, full of charisma and full of interest as well as detail to the text. And he just won as a conductor conductor, just leading the chorus and the orchestra of the Deutsche Oper Berlin so exceptionally. And what more can you expect from the chorus and the orchestra of the Deutsche Oper Berlin? Everybody was amazing, and they were able to pull it off so wonderfully that I could never ever have enough. John Adams Nixon in China, at least this production, might be kind of polarizing in terms of its overall spectacle, because there were also some brilliant moments and fun moments, but also some really questionable moments that may not be to everybody's tastes. But when it comes to the singing, everybody was at their A game. Thomas Lehmann, Kyle Miller, Porrick Rowan, Catherine Manley, Hye-Young Moon, Karis Tucker, Davia Boulay, and Elisa Fenda were all A-plus singers who gave it their all, and they managed to do so with interest, distinction, aplomb, self-confidence, and a great deal of chutzpah. I salute each and every one of these singers for making my interest in Nixon in China by John Adams all the more worthwhile, and they also deserve a whole lot of acclaim for everything that they have been accomplishing thus far. And for those of you who caught this production of John Adams Nixon in China at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, what'd you think of it? Did you feel that the popular culture references were a little bit too much on the nose for you, and you would have loved to pull it back a bit? Did you also feel like the singing was totally up to task, even in spite of the rather polarizing production? Who was your most favorite singer of Nixon in China, whether it be from the main characters or the supporting characters? Who did you feel managed to pull it off so amazingly? What was your most favorite moment of this particular production? Or do you even feel that you want a more traditional one? Or did you feel that everything about this production of Nixon in China and the singers were not up to task? Please let me know in the comments below. Well, that's it for my review of John Adams Nixon in China at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. Tune in tomorrow for my review of Strauss's Arabella, starring Daniel O'Hearn as Matteo, also at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. So until then, blessed Lenten season, everybody.